And good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Now, look, some may think that the points that I made yesterday are unrelated to Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, but I assure you they are absolutely related. Why is that? Well, because Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following speaks about the coming of the Son of Man. Then shall he sit on the throne of his glory. That's his kingdom. When he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men, Ephesians chapter 4, 8 and following. When he ascended up on high in fulfillment of Psalms 110, he sat down of the right hand of the majesty on high. He sat on the throne of David. And he would rule and he would reign in the midst of his enemies until his enemies were put under his feet. Psalms 110, verses 1 through 4. And when Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul said he must reign until all of his enemies are put under his feet, citing Psalms 110. But what Paul does in in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is to use the present infinitive, which means that Paul was saying Christ would continue to reign until his enemies were put under his feet. Well, how would he reign? Because he's on the throne, because he's ruling and reigning on the throne. You see, what Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following does, it depicts for us the ultimate fulfillment of Psalms 110. Christ having been enthroned, Psalms 110, having ruled in the midst of his enemies, he now comes to put down his enemies, to bring about the resurrection, which is the time of the destruction of the last enemy. 1 Corinthians 15, 26. So do you see what's going on here? So yesterday I pointed out, and boy, I tell you, this is so incredibly powerful to me. And by the way, in my book, Paul on Trial, Paul, the Pharisees, and the Resurrection, I discuss what I'm about to share with you in depth. And I want to tell you, I don't know of another work that develops these concepts like I do in my book, Paul on Trial. Let me urge you, get a copy of that book. Take advantage of the May 2022 U.S. orders only, Watching for the Parousia, where Jesus' apostles confused, and Paul on Trial. Total delivered price, $25. That's going to save you $10, by the way, a little bit over $10. So, in John chapter 6, the Jews were about to come and make Jesus king. Well, I posed a question yesterday. I hope you've thought about it. If the Jews wanted the kingdom, and they did, and if Jesus came to establish the kingdom, and he did, then when the Jews were about to come and to make him king, why did Jesus reject that offer of the kingdom and the kingship? Why? What do we have going on here? Did Jesus not know they were going to offer him the kingdom? Well, no, it says he perceived that they were about to come and make him king. What we have here is a failure to communicate. You remember that? A bunch of you will. The movie Cool Hand Luke. A bunch of you younger folks, if you've never watched the movie, go look it up. Cool Hand Luke. Great, one of the great lines of movies. And I'm not all that big a movie fan, but that was a fantastic line. So anyway, here this prison warden says what we have here is a failure to communicate because he had laid down the law, no escape attempts. Cool Hand Luke, Paul Newman, kept attempting to escape. And so the warden, in desperation and frustration, said, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Did the Jews not understand that Jesus came to establish the kingdom? No, they understood that he did, but they had one concept of the kingdom. He had another concept of the kingdom. Did Jesus not understand what the Jews wanted in regard to the kingdom? No, he well understood. That's why he rejected them. So in my book, Paul on Trial, Paul, the Pharisees and the Resurrection, I document the following. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, the Jews, the Jewish leaders, came to Samuel and said, "Give us a king to rule over us." And Samuel was distraught, frustrated, discouraged, despondent. And the Lord says, "Samuel, give heed to their voice. They have not rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them." Do you catch the power of what Yahweh said? In desiring an earthly, physical king on a physical throne over a geopolitical, military kingdom, Israel was rejecting God. In 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 12 and following, in 1 Samuel chapter 12, 17 and following, Samuel pointed the finger at Israel and said, "You have committed a great sin against the Lord your God in desiring a king over you." And in 1 Samuel chapter 12, the people finally admitted it and said, "We have committed a great sin against the Lord our God in desiring a king to rule over us." But they kept after it anyway. So due to the hardness of their heart, God granted them a physical king on a physical throne, ruling over a geopolitical theocracy with an army to fight their wars, to lose their sons in conflict. Now, what we have here is a threefold statement that the desire for a physical king on a physical throne, ruling over a physical kingdom, a geopolitical kingdom, was a sin against God. Now, I want you to pay very careful attention to what I'm about to say, ladies and gentlemen. And I say this with as much kindness and respect as I possibly can. The modern day dispensational paradigm desires the very kind of kingdom that the Jews offered Jesus in John 6 and the kingdom that Jesus rejected. It is the very kind of kingdom that historic premillennialism says Jesus will one day come back to earth and establish. It is the very kind of kingdom that postmillennialism and reformed amillennialism says one of these days Jesus is coming back to earth as a 5'5" Jewish man. He's going to destroy physically his enemies. And he's going to rule and reign over a geopolitical, nationalistic kingdom. Some years ago, I had a formal public debate with Harold Eberly. One of the questions from the audience to Harold Eberly was, "Are you looking forward to the establishment of a national kingdom on earth?" He said yes. In my formal public debate with Joel McDermott in 2012 at the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, which is available for download, by the way, off of my website, one of the questions from the audience was, "Are you looking forward to a yet future national kingdom to be established on earth by Christ?" And he said, yes. Now, I asked Joel, and I posed the argument in the debate. If Jesus were promising a nationalistic, geopolitical, militaristic kind of a kingdom, then why is it that when the Jews offered the kingdom to him, that he turned it down. And Joel McDermott said the time wasn't right. Well, I'm sorry. In Mark 1:15, Matthew 4:17, Jesus came saying, the time is fulfilled. The kingdom of heaven has drawn near. That statement, the time is fulfilled, as F.F. Bruce said in his little book, it's about that thick, excellent comments in it. F.F. Bruce says that terminology, the time is fulfilled, means that a long-awaited, predestinated time foretold by the prophets had now arrived. Thus, when Joel McDermott says, well, the time wasn't right for the establishment of the kingdom, that flies directly in the face of Jesus' own words. The time is fulfilled. Here's the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen. When you have reformed amillennialists, when you have postmillennialists, when you have historic premillennialists, when you have dispensationalists saying that the Christian hope is the establishment of a nationalistic, earthly, physical, geopolitical kingdom, that flies in the face of the fact that from the very beginning, 1 Samuel 8, 1 Samuel 10, 1 Samuel chapter 12, the desire for that kind of a kingdom was a rejection of the will of the Father. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, or else my servants would fight. They'd take up the sword. Like Peter tried, and Jesus said, put up your sword. Those who live by the sword, die by the sword. And yet we're told Jesus is going to come back, and he's going to kill a 200 million man army. Really? Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following posits the coming of Christ, having been enthroned in the heavens, having gone away to receive a kingdom, Luke chapter 19, 11 and following, there to be enthroned at the right hand of the Father on high, to sit and to rule in the midst of his enemies, until he would return and judge those people who had said, we will not have this man to rule over us. Who was that? Who was that who said, we have no king but Caesar? You know who that was. And the king, having been enthroned, ruling in the midst of his enemies, would come back and sit on the throne of his glory, gathering together those who either did or did not bow to his authority. That means Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, was fulfilled in the first century, when the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. Hey, I'm out of time. Thanks again for joining me on this morning's Morning Musings. Don't forget, tomorrow morning we continue our study of why N.T. Wright is wrong on the redemption of the body, the new creation. I will see you on the flip side.